1. A few months ago, I attended the funeral of one of my best bosses ever, Johan, but we called him John. I verified with a former manager and co-worker of mine, and since the company as it was no longer exists, this shouldn't be a problem. This is the story of my encounter with an extremely entitled person, and why I believe some people are plain out evil. It plays out in the Netherlands. Backstory. I was originally hired as a systems administrator by John's company. The company actually consisted of several companies grouped together under one roof. We occupy 2 stories within the building. And there were a few hundred people working there. Besides our company, there were a few others in this building, amongst which a law firm as well as an accountant's office. John made it well known that one of the reasons I was hired was because he knew me from another job. Unfortunately, I never managed to find out which. At first this worried me a little because friends and family told me that I might need to be careful of the possible appearance of involved politics with my hiring. But that turned out to be a non-issue. In fact, soon quite the opposite. I really liked my job, and when I'm in such a position, I also enjoy getting involved and learning as much as I can about the company itself. This is how I learned about minor issues between development and project management, in specific with time schedules. The devs always shut down a bit during official meetings with management, which would often lead to problems with estimates for projects. When I discovered that the devs heavily relied on Visio and project management used Project, simply put, the company fully relied on Microsoft Office, I began thinking. I started working on a test case, mostly in my own time, talked this over with the devs who really liked my idea. We'll make a dev out of you yet someday. And eventually I pitched the idea with management. They liked what they heard and saw. I had a rough prototype ready, so the next week I found myself pitching the idea to the upper management, who gave me a go for the project. I developed a VBA interface which allowed Project to retrieve specific data from Visio, thus allowing the developers to set up the time schedules within and fully based on their own designs, which could then be directly used within Project. The advantage was that project management didn't really have to push the devs anymore for possible ways to reduce time, which in its turn reduced the stress for the developers, thus resulting in much better estimates. Also because they got the feeling that they weren't defending their schedule anymore, for obvious reasons I can't get into too much detail, but I hope you get the idea. We managed to severely increase efficiency, and when management learned what you could do with VBA, they wanted to see if I could do it more. Fast forward a few years later, and I'm now the operations manager. Always disliked the title, because I fancy something more tech. It basically means I am always somewhat involved with internal projects. I'm allowed to ask for assistance from secretaries when needed, and I have full access to all our IT infrastructure. My direct colleague, the head of IT, is my immediate failsafe and backup, and I'm his. Yes, I always wore a suit since that day, but I'm also the kind of guy who would still go to collect a PC somewhere, if that could help my colleagues. Say I have a meeting with XX later today. Would it help you guys if I picked up the PC from YY next door for you? I always kept tabs on tickets and tried to help out, even if this wasn't really my job anymore. Getting under a table in a suit to help my colleagues, I didn't mind. A new project. It started on Friday. I had done a 14-hour shift the day before. I covered for someone at IT support for the evening because of an emergency, and was considering to take the afternoon off as compensation, when I noticed Jamie, the company secretary, being nervous. She wanted to go on her lunch break, but her colleague wasn't back yet to take over for her, stuck in traffic. She also couldn't postpone her lunch due to an evaluation meeting later, and she was going to cover for John's secretary after that. So I asked her to show me the phone works and to leave a manual of the telecom system. I quickly grabbed my laptop so I could work on some administration reports, and figured I'd take off once Jamie's colleague got back. Being a manager, in my opinion anyway, is also about helping out colleagues wherever you can if you can. Then I got a call from a very important customer who wanted to speak to John. I transfer him. Yay, I can do secretary work too. But stupid me asked his secretary if he was in without telling her that I got a call for him. Fortunately, not a huge problem, but John did tell me to keep this in mind for a possible next time. Direct transfer for management. Secretary transfers only for upper management, gotcha. This week, I'm invited to a meeting in John's office together with the rest of the management team. As it turns out, the very important customer, Vic, proposed a joint venture to bring in very big client. Our company would cover ITC requirements and administration, while Vic could take care of logistics and actually bring in the client. Vic's first meeting with the client would happen in our building because we had much better accommodations, such as pretty state-of-the-art conference rooms, which were also pretty awesome as cinemas to watch Star Wars, which we obviously never did. Because of my rather unique position, being somewhat involved with every tech-related department, it gets decided that I'll do the first tour with Mr. Vic to show him around, explain what we can offer, and set up an official draft to outline what we're going to do. Be sure to invite Jamie over to take notes every time you guys talk business, document everything, and don't make any official promises without a secretary present. I was hyped, nervous as heck too. The incident. Everything went quite good. The first day, I gave him a tour around the offices, demonstrated the tech of our conference rooms, and the three of us set up a solid draft proposal in 3 or so days. Jamie was a great help, but I did get the impression that this thing weighed on her. She was often nervous and even seemed a bit uncomfortable around Mr. Vic. I asked her about it, but never got a straight answer, which worried me, so I asked if John's secretary could help me to set up the final draft just in case. I didn't want to go over Jamie's head by asking one of her direct colleagues and secretary, but also didn't want to put too much stress on her. She was still an intern, getting offered a full-time position soon. I already knew this from John, even rooted for her. She was awesome at her job. We're 3 or 4 weeks in. I get into the office around 2 p.m. to witness the aftermath of a big start. I first stop on the other floor where the conference rooms are, and everything seems to be going smooth. I walk around a bit, you can look inside and outside, and when I don't see any wandering strangers, I head up to my level. I get to the main desk and see Jamie in tears, heavily sobbing and getting comforted by her colleagues. I am shocked and ask her what's going on. At first, her reaction, "What do you care?" which completely caught me off guard. I take out my phone, call the head of IT, and tell him that I'm sorry, but he needs to cover for me for the rest of the day, until further notice. I also asked him to cancel all my meetings for that day. Don't think I had any, but I also tried to make a bit of an appearance. Then I asked Jamie again what's going on, and she tells me that she's getting fired. What? That can't be right, but she's convinced. And then the magic word comes out. I ruined a big project. I ask her how she did that. That wasn't important because Mr. Vic said as much. Now I was puzzled and very much intrigued. I asked her if she would come with me to sort a few things out. She reluctantly agreed, and we went straight to an empty executive office, one of my perks, and I offered her a drink. Coffee, Scotch, Baileys. We ended up with a coffee and Baileys mix. First time I drank that stuff. Probably in complete violation of a few rules, but right now I needed a drink too, and I was actually somewhat allowed. Sorta. So then Jamie finally tells me what happened. She went to look into the conference room to see if things went according to plan and asked if they needed something. Then she noticed that the room was packed, jammed, way more people in there than fire regulations allow for. So she told Mr. Vic, who then scolded her, berated her, and told her to mind her own damned business, and directed her out, telling her that he'd be talking to John about this, how she was actively sabotaging a project, and he'd make sure she get fired. I was pissed. Especially since I knew this was all a load of nonsense. How did I know? Because John made it quite clear to me when I signed the contract for my new management position that bullying, entitled behavior, disrespecting your colleagues, and anything within that context was a reason for dismissal for us managers. Another thing, safety regulations were sacred to my company. So I called security, filed an official request to look at the security cameras, and save the relevant parts. I'll never forget the next moment. So, he scolded your colleague. Holy shit. That's not the only thing he did. No, it wasn't just scolding. This lowlife also deemed it necessary to physically shove Jamie around, and he forcefully pushed her out of the room, where she fell on the floor, after which he slammed the door shut again. Adrenaline rushes are a strange thing, I can tell you that. I can easily see how some people get carried away during such a rush. All I wanted to do now was shut the whole thing down, and yell at this guy, but I had to make sure we were covered. Of course, there was also the alcohol at work. I called my direct colleagues in a group conference on speaker. I wanted to keep Jamie fully in the loop, and the three of us, head of development, IT, and myself, all agreed. So I said to Jamie that I had an important task for her, and asked if she wanted to help me shut the whole thing down. Jamie called for building security to send some people over. I texted John and briefed him. Then us three managers, with Jamie in tow, went over there. To make sure that we'd get the message across, we decided to cut power to the conference room so that everything went black save for the emergency lights. Definitely got their attention. Mr. Vic was livid, especially when he saw Jamie, who was standing right next to us. I even got the impression he completely overlooked us at first because he actually stormed over to her. Yeah, other John, the head of IT, we sometimes jokingly called him Little John because Big John was the CEO, was standing next to her really quick and even shoved Mr. Vic when the douchebag got too close to her for his liking. Next moment, the big boss storms in with someone else. Both have an expression of thunder on their faces. They are pissed. For obvious reasons, I need to be careful with the next parts. I also don't know everything that came from this. But as it turns out, our CEO, John, was having dinner with the CEO of Vic to celebrate the joint venture when this shitshow happened. Mr. Vic, the guy who I worked with, got fired on the spot after I had used my phone to play the security footage on the big screen. This had been sent to me by security. His boss wasn't happy, but that wasn't enough for John, oh no. He and Jamie went a few stories down to the law firm later that day to make sure Jamie got proper legal representation, paid for by the company, because John wanted that SOB roasted one way or another, and to make sure that this was made right with Jamie. We also got assurances that very same day that if she wanted, she'd get hired as soon as the internship was over. Jamie was in charge of handling the aftermath of that conference. I kinda pushed for that, and she also thanked me for it later, because that really helped her self-esteem. Basically, we no longer relied on Vic got it covered, but we asked all visitors for their details to know who we were dealing with. So now we had people to follow her orders and directions about leaving the premises. However, I could not understand to this very day what kind of people would still want to do business with a sleazeball who plain out abuses co-workers. But at the same time, there was a huge amount of money involved there, and, in all fairness, I suppose it's easy to have an opinion about stuff that doesn't directly involve you. I don't know what to think on this one, to be honest. As for me, I got scolded in a friendly way for drinking alcohol on the job, but at the same time I also got compliments for the way I handled things. Especially for taking action by escalating the whole thing instead of worrying about big money and the very important client. We ended up cutting ties with Vic, but ironically enough, it seems we did leave an impression with a very big client who relied on our services a few times. 2. I'm 38 years old and male, and the following events took place when I was about 12. So details will be few, but I will share what I know. Background. I grew up in a semi-developed area, back when my grandparents, on my mother's side, first purchased the land. The area was fairly rural, but over time a neighborhood grew up around them. As their children grew up, my grandparents decided to divide the property they owned into several parcels and gave each of their kids a plot of land. My grandpa was also a house mover. Note, moving the actual buildings from one location to another, not moving people or belongings from one house to another. So he helped them move houses from an area that was slated to be demolished to build a highway onto the new parcels. I grew up with all my immediate neighbors being my family. As time marched forward, my aunts and uncles moved to new locations as their housing needs changed, i.e. new job, more kids and rooms, etc. As they moved out, the new neighbors were pulled into the environment and became close family friends, as we were all friendly, and it gave the area a small-town feel, even though by this point, we were part of a larger city now. One day, one of these new neighbors had gotten his realtor's license and was constantly approaching my parents with amazing opportunities to purchase land as an investment. My parents, being good friends with this neighbor, didn't want to offend him by telling him that they weren't interested and would never be interested, decided instead to give him a long list of requirements for the type of property that they would be interested in buying. The list included: it needed to be within 2 hours driving distance, it needed to be away from any major cities, it needed to be within 5 minutes of a nearby town. You shouldn't be able to see said town. It had to be at least 1 acre, about 4,000 square meters. It needed a stream running through it. There were other requirements, but I don't remember them all. The only other requirement that my parents gave this family friend was that it had to be at a price so low. They figured they had sent him off on a unicorn hunt. 1 week later, he came back with their unicorn. In the past, a less than scrupulous realtor had a client that wanted to invest in land. This realtor had sold him bits and pieces of mostly useless land. Think thousands of acres chopped up into useless chunks, i.e. a couple of acres on the side of the mountain so steep that you couldn't build on it, or a few acres that could be used but was landlocked by other owners without any access to it. After he passed on, his daughters were selling this land to get what they could for it. The unicorn property was one of the few that was accessible and flat enough to be usable, with enough slope to keep the stream running through it from being a flood hazard. The surrounding land was used by farmers that raised sheep or turkeys. Most of these farmers owned thousands of acres, so when the realtors selling him had approached them about possibly buying 3 acres, they all dismissed it as not worth their time. This is important later. My parents, after some serious discussions with each other over what to do, decided to buy the property. After all, it was an opportunity that was too good to pass up, and the number that my parents had given was within their means, even if it was a stretch on their finances. They did everything by the books. An independent survey was conducted, and the surveyor drove stakes into the ground at all 4 corners of the lot. It ended up being about 3 acres of land. Now, the survey was off from some of the fences in the area, as those fences had been done informally by the farmers as a way of keeping livestock from wandering off. My family consists of my parents, me, and my 3 siblings. As kids, we're just old enough to be of help on construction projects, as my family didn't have extra cash to pay a contractor to build the house. They decided that instead of taking a camping trailer we had out camping, they would instead park it on our new property and develop the land ourselves. This property was now our vacation property. As we laid out where the fence lines would be, we noticed that the neighbor's gate access to his property was mostly on our side of the property line, but some was on his side as well. Now, we had used this gate to get in, as the gate was locked by a chain that had several locks on it to allow multiple people access, and my parents, with the purchase, had received a key to one of the locks on the gate. My parents decided to fence up our property and leave a big enough gap that anyone with a key could open this gate and drive through to the neighbor's land. Here's where the story starts. We were doing most of the work on the weekends, as my dad still had his regular job to work. We started putting up fencing on Friday evening. Slept in the trailer, got up on Saturday, finished putting up the rest of the fence, and had planned on just enjoying Sunday. Midday Sunday, the neighbor showed up and started opening his gate. As my dad had to run into town for something, my mom decided to go and introduce herself and make sure that the gap we had left was big enough for his access needs. "Hi, you must be our neighbor," said my mom. "We're the ones who bought this property. We live up in the city and bought this as a vacation property. I just wanted to introduce myself and make sure we left you enough room for any equipment you might need to get through this gate, as we won't always be here if it becomes an issue." "Your property line is off. You look at the fence on the far side and you'll see that you're taking more than your share. You need to move your fence." We wondered about that too when we first saw the surveyor's stakes, but we've had a survey double-checked, and it was done based on the town centre. We were also assured that all marks are within 3 inches, about 7.6 centimeters of true. Note, we could roughly divide our property into thirds using existing land markers. 1/3 was on the other side of the stream, 1/3 from the stream to where the old fence would have continued if it had made a 90-degree turn, and last from the old fence line into the new fence we had just put in. That can't be right. You're more than welcome to have it double-checked if you want. I use this stream to water my sheep, and if the property line is that far off from the old fence line in your favor, it could easily be that far off in the other direction. So all the land to the stream is mine. You need to get off. We purchased 3 acres worth of land, and what is left on the other side might be 1 acre, but there's no way it's 3. The survey can't be off by that much. I think this surprised the entitled farmer, as my mom had said we were from the city, and he didn't expect us city slickers to know what an acre is. And he had decided to change tactics.
Even if the original property line was where you say it is, it doesn't matter now. The law says that something is treated as a property line for X number of years and it becomes a property line.
Now this is true, however it must be treated as a property line by all owners involved in order to become the line in fact. I believe the reasoning for this law was to keep surveys that historically wandered a bit, due to old surveys being less accurate than new surveys from causing too many property disputes. As a man who had owned this property before us had never been here, he couldn't have agreed to treat anything as a property line.
Since the fence in the stream has been used as a property line for my property for at least 20 years now, it definitely qualifies, and so all this land is mine, no matter what your survey says.
Look, we're not going to block your access to the stream. We won't be here most of the time, so it won't bother us if you drive your sheep through this access gap and water your animals. Also, as long as we can keep using the gate, we won't close up the gap, and both of us can use it. You for your property and us for ours. I don't remember what he said, if anything, after that. But he got in his truck and drove off into his property. Another thing to note is that this road and gate wasn't the primary access to his property. It was more of a convenient way to get to this part of his land. If the earth opened up and created a canyon along the fence line the gate was on, he would still have access to all his property. We went home at the end of the day so my dad could work his normal work week. The next weekend, we got back down to our vacation property. We found that the entitled farmer had ripped out our fence line where the old dirt track crossed it and piled it up along the old fence. We got to work putting it back in place. My dad decided that if that was how entitled farmer was going to behave, he would stop trying to accommodate him. We finished fencing in our property right in the middle of his gate. We added our own gate right next to it on our property. Also, the work we had originally planned on getting done this weekend was to dig a trench for the foundation of the home we were building. My dad decided that we would use the old dirt track that ran through the middle of our property as the driveway. He dug the trenches so that the foundation would be centered on the dirt track. The extra dirt and rocks dug up, he put it right on the dirt track at the edge of the property so that even if entitled farmer ripped out the fence, he still wouldn't be able to drive there. The entitled farmer did rip up our fence again and confronted my dad about the land being his, but by then my parents had consulted a lawyer and knew that there was nothing the entitled farmer could do. Once my parents had the lawyer send a cease and desist letter, we never heard from him again. In the end, instead of sharing a gate and herding his animals through the access point to water with them, with the stream on our property, he decided to destroy our fence. As a result, his access was closed, and he needed to pay to buy water rights to water his animals. Also, the first time we came down to find the fence ripped out, we also found that the farmer had removed the lock we had a key to, so we had to cut the chain and add a new lock to use it again. 3. My mom and I run a little farm with rescue and pet animals, and often need help with repairs, etc. We found a handyman who is multi-talented and cheap, a lifesaver really, as we are chronically broke. So we're really worried about alienating him over the following matter. He offered to have a friend look at our lame horse as she's a farrier in training, and might offer ideas. It turned out she knew nothing about horses and came to learn rather than help, and having the memory of a pebble, she needs a horse's condition explained to her over and over, while she can't help and won't involve people she knows who can. She has become invasive and patronizing, telling me what the horse needs when I told her 100 times this is either not a need, not a priority, and not possible and downright dangerous due to its condition, and the vet agrees with me. Every time she makes this debate, she has been inviting herself to muck the stables for free, which I told her politely was not necessary. She runs back and forth hand-feeding the lame horse and carrying water to it, as if I'm not feeding this horse specifically while the others are taken care of. She also brought that mare 2 blankets, which can't have cost less than $70 each. I told her this is not necessary, but she acted like I was just being irresponsible for not wrapping that horse in a blanket it already had, during mild weather. Hell, I don't have a warm coat because I'm spending 537% of my 3-digit income in my animals. I have to double my Ritalin intake and send my blood pressure sky high just to function when she's here. I need 1 or 2 days rest after each time, which in turn triples my backlog of chores. So she's not even really helping. We made a coffee corner in the barn, so everything they need is within reach rather than having to walk all the way back to the house all the time. But not only won't she make her own coffee, she impatiently waits for me to interrupt my chores to make her one. She also insists that I do fetch water from the house because our well water isn't good enough for her, it's safe. When I'm otherwise occupied, she asks my mother with her bad knee to fetch that water for her. After they had a fight, our handyman told us she thinks her animals are not in good hands. I told him I appreciate her good intentions, but she is wrong and overstepping. He agreed, but they made up and he started bringing her again. Awkward. That day we sat down to discuss the horse, as they had offered to take it off my hands. I told them the horse is not for sale or adoption, and while I was talking, she was nosing through our medications on the table. She even picked up my mum's inhaler and said in a baby squeak, "Someone ain't breathing so well." The fuck? Is COPD funny to you? Then he casually tells me that he already leased a pasture and got a companion pony and are ready to take my mare. Says she would remain mine, of course, and they're just doing me a favor. See, I do have some legal literacy, and I would 100% lose that horse. He then said, "Well, plus she needs a horse for her training." Oh, I see now. And while I'm typing this out around midnight, she is bombarding me with messages educating me about how this horse needs to be rehomed because of hierarchy stress. Ah! This is a herd animal, and herds have hierarchy skirmishes. Whomever shall I rehome this horse to, I wonder. And I was told I was entitled for asking my dad for financial help after he stole $20,000 from me. A little while later, I decided to put my foot down and sent her a voice message, politely but firmly, telling her she is not getting the horse. She lacks the experience to care for this particular horse. I don't appreciate having my competence questioned, and if she wants the blankets back, I'll give them to the handyman next time he's here. Then I blocked her. But she did read it. If this wasn't clear, then I guess the wheel is still spinning, but the hamster's dead. The handyman did come as usual, without her, after he apparently told her he's no longer moving in with her or anything else that requires him to endure her, and got a fuck ton of work done. He did acknowledge that she tends to take it too far and needs to learn to take no for an answer, and allow other people to have other thoughts on how to treat animals. She complained that our place isn't sterile and that I'm not nice to the animals because of how I talk to them in between baby speak and stuffing them with biscuits. I mean, that's just how I am. I lovingly call my favorite horse a crusty shit cow. One of the dogs is a one-bald fuckboy. My late cat, whom I loved very much, was my most beautiful asshole, so sue me. He said he respects my decision to keep the horse, but would always happily take her if I do change my mind. I tend to believe him. He has expressed his annoyance with her more than once, and I think his support for her trying to get the horse was mostly based on me possibly coming across as overwhelmed. 4. So this happened around 7 to 8 years ago, when I was working at a bakery and fast food chain. We sold sandwiches and some warm food like sausages and hot dogs, etc. One part of the counter was reserved for people standing in line, talking with their staff and paying for their food. The other was for fetching your food once it was done. The location was the arrival hall of a train station, so there were a lot of people standing in line pretty much all the time. That afternoon, there were about 30 people standing in line. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw the entitled wife and her husband come running from the platforms, both in sleek business suits and very much able to run. Hubby stands to the side, and entitled wife walks up to the stand next to the person who waited 10 minutes to be first in line. We are severely understaffed, and the line was long enough to divide the arrival hall in half, so it's very obvious where you're supposed to stand. I proceeded to take and fulfill orders as fast as I can, while ignoring the entitled wife in favor of the people who have been standing in the line longest. After 2 minutes, she can't take it anymore. "Excuse me, are you intentionally ignoring me?" "Hello, ma'am. Yes, I was intentionally serving the people who have been waiting in line for 10 minutes first. If you would like to order, please go to the end of the line and wait your turn like everyone else does." Okay, I admit I was kind of snapping at her, but that line had been there for around an hour, without getting shorter, and some people had to get their next train while I was burning skid marks in the floor from turning between counter and coffee machines. But we have to reach our next train. Ma'am, this is a train station. 50% of people in that line need to go to their train soon. You may ask the next person in line if they would let you go first, though. But my husband is disabled. Remember the running, rich-looking husband standing behind her in business attire, looking embarrassed now. I keep preparing orders. Ma'am, we have hundreds of customers every day, very diverse, many of which are blind like my own father or deaf like my mother, walking with crutches or can't walk at all because they sit in a wheelchair. Some can barely keep standing because they have chronic pains, but they all stand and wait in line. Meanwhile, I saw both of you running here separately. You both seem coherent enough, and your husband does not look like he has problems standing. If a crippled person can stand in line, then so can you with your supposed disabled husband. We will not serve you until the people who have waited the longest have been served first, or someone in line gives you the permission to go first. If your husband has problems standing for a long time, he may sit down at a table and wait for you while you stand in line. Afterwards, I ignored her and kept serving. Her turn never came. As I said, I was kind of under pressure and my parents are actual disabled people. Also, I had served plenty of disabled people there and knew from talking to many of them that they would never use that to piss off 30 people just to get their food faster. Most of them want to be treated normally and keep their autonomy as much as they can. So yeah, maybe entitled wife hit a nerve there with bad timing. I'm usually very polite even if a customer spits or throws their trash at me. Yes, that happened. I would calmly ask them to leave or I will have to call the police. There had been plenty of people trying to cut in line before, cussing at me when I did not oblige. Somehow she got me pissed with that excuse. 5. The year was 2016. I had worked as a stalker for a craft store for over a year. But when my dad retired, we were moving out of state. I handed in my 2 weeks' notice, stating that the 18th of the month, a Wednesday, was my last day of work. I double-checked my schedule to make sure I'm taken off, and I see that I'm scheduled until the 20th, that Friday. Hey, I say to the store manager, I can't work the last 2 days, the 18th is my last day. Oh, really? I thought you could work a few days after that. No, I'm moving out of state. We're packing up our last bit of stuff and leaving. It even says on my notice that the 18th is the last day I can possibly work. Oh, okay. I'll fix the schedule. Mildly irritating to have to argue my case, but the store manager has always been a bit spacey and disconnected to reality and time. So I chalk it up to him having a derp moment and let it go. I work my last few days, get hugs from the co-workers I'm friendly with, say goodbye to all the staff, and go home for the final time. Thursday the 19th, I get a call on my cell phone from the craft store's number. It's the floor manager. Where are you? Home, packing the last of my stuff. The 18th was my last day. I had told the store manager to take me off the schedule. Well, I put you back on there myself. We need you for a few more days. You're supposed to be here now. Oh, so it was the floor manager's fault. She and I had butted heads often, to the point where I had reported her to corporate for trying to make me work off the clock. I'm irritated. Well, I'm not available. I'm leaving the state. You had 2 weeks to rearrange the schedule to prepare for this. This store does not rearrange itself to your schedule. This is a job, and you need to work when needed. Not anymore. I don't work for the store anymore. I even got my last paycheck. You don't get your paycheck until Friday, so you can knock off the lying. Get in here, and I'll think about not writing you up for this. I was silent for about a heartbeat, stunned by the sheer idiocy. Then I burst out laughing, loudly and at length. The floor manager tried to yell at me, but I was laughing so hard that I couldn't stop to hear anything she said, so I just laughed over her. When I caught my breath again, I said into the ceiling silence, I quit on Wednesday. I don't take orders from you anymore. Goodbye. I hung up on her and let further calls go straight to voicemail. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Idiots in the Wild. episode 48. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do all the things and stuff. I like it when you do that. It does help. I've seen the results, and it definitely helps when you guys share it and promote it on social media and things. Okay, let's see. Oh yes, if you have a story yourself you'd like to send in, then please do send it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. That's kingofthecities@gmail.com. And if you need to see that spelled out, you can find that in the description of this video, and pretty much most videos really. On my channel, not just random people's. It'd be weird if they had my email address in their descriptions. That'd be very peculiar indeed. I also want a big bowl of pasta of some kind. Noodles, spaghetti, penne, the twisted one. Doesn't matter, as long as it's not fusilli. The twists, I don't like them. They're evil. What's that got to do with video making? Nothing, it just popped into my head. I'll probably eat in a couple hours, so let's see. Leave your favourite type of pasta in a comment below. Is that a sneaky way of getting you to comment on the video? Yes, it definitely is, because YouTube loves it when you do that. They recommend them a lot more often when you do. That's just facts. That's the way it works. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.